You know, there's a couple ways to look at these temple guardians. One is pretty obvious, that they're just keeping negative energy from coming into the temple, but we can go deeper. Let's think of the temple as a metaphor for us, that there's this space inside of us of complete awareness and presence. But not all of you can go in that temple. There's a part of you, the part that's grasping for what it feels is good and pushing away what it feels is bad, that can't come in. The part that's worrying about tomorrow and regretting what happened yesterday, that can't come in either. If that comes in, you're in the temple, but you're not really in the temple. You're in your mind. So you have to allow these temple guardians to shred that part of you, leave it behind, and then you can enter the holy space. Welcome to the belly of the beast.
The big durian, which is another name for Jakarta. I guess it comes from the love it or hate it sort of philosophy when it comes to durian, consuming durian. And it's the same philosophy when you consider a giant metropolis like Jakarta.
Yeah, Jakarta is definitely a love it or hate it city. Unlike the Big Apple, I think most people like New York, but you got to hand it to the forefathers of New York City. They created that subway system a long time ago, I don't know, 30s, 40s, and still it accommodates the population today.
For sure.
Whereas the forefathers of Jakarta never even thought of a public transportation system, and traffic here is one of the worst you'll see. Pollution is really bad. It's just urban planning, there's just no foresight at all.
Hence the relocation of the capital to Kalimantan.
Right, that'll be interesting. We're about to leave, but we intend to come back, and I'm really interested to talk to the citizens of Jakarta. And what is it like psychologically when you've grown up in like the capital city and suddenly you're going to lose that status?
Yeah, imagine you've made investments in real estate, you have a business, and now your nation's capital is saying bye-bye.
Right.
How'd that happen?
Yeah. Are we rolling?
Are we rolling?
Is this rolling?
Yeah.
All right. Poof. A microphone has appeared. Amazingly, our gear made it through the whole episode, and it just now, the microphone gave up the ghost.
Yeah.
As happens. So we were talking about Jakarta, and Jakarta is unfortunately a city on the decline because they're moving the capital city. It's overcrowded, it's overpolluted, and it's flooding a lot. And with rising sea levels, that's not going to get much better. So, yeah, it's interesting. You can kind of feel it in the energy. You know how when you're in certain places that are on the up and up, you feel that optimism, like a wave is building. And here you kind of feel the opposite, to be honest. And that's no slight against the citizens. I love the people in this city. Everybody I've met is great. But as an entity, this city is on the decline.
Yeah, and it should be something that we cover in an upcoming episode in detail. We'll venture out to Kalimantan and see what's going on. I'm sure a lot of locals are going to be displaced, a lot of impactful stories.
Yeah, it's like the tale of two cities.
Yeah.
Really, one's on the decline, the other one's on the rise, and how does that affect what's the energy here and what's the energy in Jakarta, and then what stories just naturally unfold from there.
Speaking of which, we can naturally gravitate towards the topic of the double-edged side of tourism.
Right. Yeah, speaking of double-edged, we just finished filming in Bali, which is, a king, one of the three kings of tourism.
Paradise Island.
Paradise Island.
Instagram-worthy spot, probably number one Instagrammable spot on the planet Earth.
Everybody's heard of Bali. Have you ever mentioned Bali to somebody and they...
Oh yeah, their eyes light up. It's like, oh man, I want to go there. Send me your shows on Bali. I want to see
Yeah.
you know, what it's all about. Absolutely, yeah.
And that tourism has brought in a lot of money, a lot of opportunity for people, a lot of
Absolutely.
jobs. On the other hand, it has transformed the island, which you can really see almost like this sounds a little extreme, but almost in the tourist epicenters, it's almost like a cancer cell that's growing.
Yeah.
You know what I
The
mean?
tip of the tourism sphere is definitely south of Bali, Kuta, Seminyak.
Mhm.
And you can just feel it slowly. It's taken over Ubud now.
Yeah.
Ubud used to be the health center, getaway, retreat kind of place of Bali, and it's totally commercialized now.
Yeah, when you drive down the street in a scooter, you're in this nonstop corridor of shops and restaurants. It's just buy something, buy something, buy something. You know, and if you get an occasional rare break where the stores stop and you get a glimpse of a rice field, it's like
Yeah.
But
What-
in general, you're in a cocoon of tourism until you get out to the extremes of the island.
Yeah, we're starting to sound like a bunch of squares now about every destination. That's not the truth. Bali does have some great, amazing spots. You just
Yeah.
have to know, like all travel, where to go, what to do.
That's true, and everything changes. That's just the reality. You know, I have a personal policy. If I go someplace, for example, in my 20s, I spent some great times in Koh Phangan, Thailand, some real ideal beaches where I made some great memories. Am I going to go back there? No, because now I'll go and there'll be a Kentucky Fried Chicken,
Yeah.
where once there was palm trees,
Quickie marts and
Quickie Marts.
Yeah.
So, but somebody new will go there for the first time and it'll be an amazing experience for them. So I think you just have to accept the destination for what it is, and if you have a great time there, maybe consider never coming back. Just leave that memory alone. But this is the nature of things. Things are always changing. We heard a pretty sad story. We were filming with a lady who's defending animal rights on the island. She talked about this UNESCO World Heritage Site that basically got given to the village for stewardship. That's how they work. And the village sold it to a businesswoman, and the dollar amount was high enough, and now she's gonna like rip up the entire thing, put in tourist swings and shops and knick-knack places. And you know, at first blush when I heard this story, I was like, fuck. But you know, I thought about it some more, and this is how the sands of time work. You think about all the great libraries in antiquity that were burned, and all the ruins toppled, and the temple in Jerusalem destroyed by the Romans. It's just how it goes. And it could be worse. It could have been a construction company that bought the site from the villagers.
and apartment buildings.
Or apartment
Yeah.
buildings. So everything is constantly changing in this world, and you got to learn how to let go a little bit.
And one thing that we did touch upon in this episode is how you, as a traveler, can be a responsible traveler.
That's right.
Which brings us on to the topic of Kopi Luwak.
Yeah, Kopi Luwak. Yeah, this is like, again, this is a theme. I'd say 90% of what we filmed, 95% in Bali, just came to us. But there was one thing that both of us had heard about. I think we first encountered it in our
Philippines trip or first Indonesian
First
trip?
Indonesia
Yeah.
around 2012, 2013. And since then, we've obviously both seen it in many travel destinations, and we know the story, which is it's coffee that this coffee beans that the civet cat, a nocturnal, shy, remote feline that lives in the kind of the jungle
Canopies, yeah.
it eats these beans, and then when it poops the bean out, obviously it's the perfect bean minus all the fruit, which is how all fruits work, right? How they're designed for us to eat and then poop out the seed. But somehow, historically, we get into it in the episode, there's a historic reason how this kind of caught fire and became like the ideal cup of coffee, was the civet cat poop coffee. And it's boomed into this big industry now, which unfortunately there's just not enough civet cats pooping in the wild to provide for the amount of civet coffee that's demanded. So what happens? You can guess what happens. These cats are captured, put in cages, force-fed the beans. It's not a good situation.
And it's massive, massive tourism. I remember pointing the camera at the parking lot where we came out of, and a whole horde of tourism buses just roll in, and just boatloads of tourists, and they're all going in to taste Kopi Luwak.
Yeah. And if you're a hardened traveler, a seasoned traveler, you can look at, and I'm certainly guilty of this, looking at a busload of tourists like that, and in your mind kind of judging them like, God damn tourists. but but to quote the Bible, which I don't often do, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do, right? These people are just uninformed. I was one of these guys once upon a time when I stumbled out of Peoria, Illinois, just a sheltered Midwestern guy. I would have drank this Luwak coffee thinking, wow, cool, unique experience. They just don't have the information. So it falls on more experienced travelers to set the tone. And if you have a voice in whatever field you're in, it's the burden's more on you than the uninformed tourists to really set the precedent. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it. So I think Johnny came to an internal dilemma of how to perfectly capture this experience of Kopi Luwak.
Right.
So I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, Sashi wanted to cover it, and he was absolutely right to use our voice on this show to spread awareness of the subject. I felt a little torn because in order to get this expose, we would have to go into a place and drink the Kopi Luwak, which means paying money and supporting it in a small way. And I felt torn about that, number one, just on an ethical standpoint. I didn't want to support them. And two, I don't want to lose you guys, the audience. I don't want you to be like, look at Jonathan Legg, asshole, he's drinking this Kopi Luwak. So, I thought about it a lot and talked to some people. And in the end, it's like, okay, in the end, the influence, how many people we could maybe convince not to drink Kopi Luwak is greater than the small admission fee we paid to go into this joint. And you'll see how it plays out. I don't want to ruin too much of the thing, but until you see the episode, trust me, don't buy this product. You're drinking basically, how did that lady put it? Cruelty in a cup. Yeah, cruelty in a cup. So, and if you've got any doubts, look up the information and then follow up by watching our episode.
Cool. Yeah, let's talk about how the Bali episode came together. Ultimately, after that long ride in Vietnam, I just wanted to take a break, live the villa life, and scooty around the island, go diving, snorkeling, put the script together, and then maybe by day 3, day 4, we start trying to put an Indonesian/Balinese episode together.
Yeah.
And there was only a handful of segments that was sort of fixed, which was that segment about coral reef restoration in North Bali.
And that was great.
Resort. Yeah.
That was really cool. We met a lot of, what would you call them? Upstanding citizens, I suppose. Upstanding citizens of the world. And I don't know why that brings me back to the classic. Nowadays, you go to school, get an education. It's like job training, right? You're going to learn how to be an engineer. You're going to learn how to be a programmer. But the traditional Greek idea of an education was to become a good citizen. And we certainly met some great citizens, including this guy at the Coral Reef Restoration. Chris Brown. Yeah,
of Reef Scene Dive Resort. And this is also another sensitive topic that we touched upon, which is mass coral bleaching because of the rise of temperatures of our oceans. So the coral reefs reach a certain threshold of temperature and then they just give up the ghost. They're done and they start bleaching, and which means they're dead. And if the coral reefs die, the fish and all the marine life basically don't have a home anymore.
Yeah.
So they get wiped out as well. It's not just the coral reefs that we're losing.
Right. And I know this opens up a can of worms in your mind as it opens up in my mind. And it's easy to get overwhelmed, like, oh shit, there's just so many problems in the world right now. Yeah. But Chris had a good antidote to that.
Yeah, that was a good nugget, yeah.
It's something that I'm definitely going to take for him. He just decided on this philosophy of, look, I'm just going to try to enact change in my little corner of the world. And he put his full focus on that, and it's working. He's got a turtle, what would you call it, turtle restoration?
Yeah, it's like a hatchery almost.
A hatchery, yeah. So he managed to work out a situation to rebound the turtle population that is good for tourists, it's good for the local fishermen, it's good for the turtles, it's good for his business. So all around, everybody wins. And He's got this restoration project for the reef.
Yeah, it's almost like a modular concept of restoration and revival of our ecosystems, and it's like someone can see how his project has become a success in this regional part of Bali, and they can copy paste his methodology in their part of the world and see success there locally. And hopefully if different pockets of people come and see and replicate that, then you have something that's organically growing bigger and bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that was a really cool concept.
Yeah, I think he's onto something. The solutions have to come at a grassroots local level.
Yep.
And he wasn't coming in as like this the guy's from Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he wasn't coming in as this outsider like I'm going to save the island. He's very intentional about communicating with the locals, with the fishermen, and trying to give them as much credit as possible. In fact, whenever he had the opportunity, he would make it seem like it was their idea and let them take all the glory, because the mission is more important than
the glory, the self-glory.
The self-glory,
yeah.
Right? And that's, I think, a real heroic quality.
Yeah, back to Bali and how we put the episode together.
Yeah. Yeah, so we got that, and it's like, well, that's pretty much all we had planned. And
then, as is always the case, once the boots hit the ground, stuff just comes in organically, and we start chasing them, and lo and behold, we got an episode. One big thing that kept popping up, which is very common in Bali, are ceremonies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the most spiritual islands in the world, and a very unique sort of spirituality. It's Hinduism, but with a Bali twist, combined with animistic beliefs,
right,
that are their own unique thing, just evolved naturally on that island. So there's no place exactly like Bali when it comes to this form of spiritualism, and we stumbled upon a lot of temples, and just were received rather warmly, explored their mythology. We met with a dukun, like a witch doctor, and he put us through a special kind of ceremony, where I was sort of looking to try to get a glimpse into the spirit world, and I'll let you see the episode to see how that turned out.
We crashed a random ceremony.
We did, yeah, and it just
chance.
happened to be a huge one.
Yeah.
You're just riding down the road, and you got to trust when you're traveling. You got to trust that spidey sense you have, where something just catches your eye. Maybe it might not be the most bombastic thing on the surface. You just see a doorway and there's a sound coming out, or there's a movement, and something about it evokes something in you. That there's a critical moment there where you're like, no, I was planning to go to the coffee shop, or no, I was planning to go to the
it's easy to whiff by those things.
Whiff by it, right? But really try to set the intention at the start of your trip that you will say yes to that little voice in your mind, to that little curiosity bell when it ding, 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 when it goes off, stop.
And it could be uncomfortable. It could be 100 degrees outside.
Yeah.
You just want to sit in the AC. You don't want to bust out the camera gear and start filming.
Yeah,
you got to do it.
That same problem that could afflict you as a traveler, where you're just dead set on going from A to B and just knocking out your itinerary. It affects us as a camera crew, because we unpack it all. We film something, and we're like, okay, the next thing we got an idea to do this. We're heading out there, and that's how we got into this temple. We literally drove by this doorway.
I just saw a great B-roll shot of the temple guardians. That was something that we were covering.
Yeah.
And this one looked grandiose. I was like, oh, we got to stop here.
Yeah. So we stopped there, and then next thing you know, there's a staircase.
You hear music.
I hear the music at the top of
chanting.
the stairs, and it opened up to something pretty cool, which you will see in the episode.
Yes.
And
there was another type of ceremony that we witnessed, which was pretty heavy.
Yeah, it was heavy. Yeah, this theme came about, and it's strange. This might tie into a viewer question, but before we took this trip, this is a little personal, but I felt like the specter of death over the trip. It's hard to describe, but it was just sort of this gut feeling that I could potentially die on this trip. And I felt it. I felt it before. I felt it when we were going to film in that tiger sanctuary in the bottom of West Bengal.
Sundarbans.
Yeah. I was dreading this. We were planning on the end of season 1 to film in this area. It's a tiger sanctuary, and they got big crocs, they got all kinds of things. And for some reason, the whole season, as we're getting closer to this last episode, I had this dread, like, that I was going to die there. And a guy from either Washington State University or the University of Washington was pulled out of his boat by a giant croc, never seen again in the area. And we ended up canceling that episode because we had enough content. We split one of the episodes, we had enough, and so I was saved by the bell, so to speak. And again, I felt that specter of death over this trip between Vietnam and Bali and somewhere in Asia. I don't know, I just felt some danger, and I wrote a personal letter to a friend of mine saying, if I die, here's a document with all my stuff. You don't have to look at it now, but if something happens, here's everything. And then out of the blue, Sashi writes me a message, and he's like, hey, I got extra insurance for this trip. I just have a feeling. Well, I'm like, whoa, that's strange. And we get here when we're still in Vietnam, I get the news that a friend of ours checked himself into the hospital with cancer. It turned out to be cancer, aggressive cancer. And then just a couple days ago, he passed. And so that it's strange that I had that feeling, and this guy's very similar to me in so many ways. He was sort of on the predecessor to
this show.
Show. And then on top of that, this theme came to us in Bali. We didn't seek it out, but it came to us. We got invited to a funeral. Somebody told us about a very unique kind of cemetery.
At the village of Chun Yan, the open cemetery that they have, where they leave their dead in the open, in the wild, basically.
So we're witnessing death in a very profound way during this episode, and at the same time Sashi and I are witnessing this, we're hearing daily updates about our friend who is on death's door and has since passed. So it was a very weird position, I think, for both of us to be filming this and for me to be hosting this and speaking on the topic, knowing that my friend was probably going to die, and it very well could have been me. I mean, who knows how this thing cosmically works, but I felt it before the episode. It very easily could have been me. There's no reason why this guy and not me, we were equally healthy. In fact, he was a stronger, more rugged version of me. So it makes you think, and we cover some pretty deep thoughts in the subject, but it's not something that at first blush you might think, oh, I don't want to talk about that. And that's kind of the Western culture reaction to it. Mm-hmm. Modern commercial culture sort of pushes away this idea, right? We hide our elderly. It's shameful even to get old. But life and death are two sides of the same coin. And I don't believe you can fully appreciate being alive unless you know what's on that other side and you understand that as well. So it is sad and it is morose, but it also really can encourage you to live and seize this life. And I think we found that balance in the Bali episode.
Yeah, it was amazing to witness the ceremony, the burial rites of this gentleman that passed. And what I found particularly interesting was that the people that were doing the ceremonies were a lot younger. They were about our age, or some even younger. Not necessarily. There was just one elder priest.
That's right.
Where everybody else was far, far younger than the gentleman that had passed, which shows how in tune they are and comfortable they are with death.
Right. Yeah.
Because it was a much younger generation handling the whole process.
Yeah, and they seemed perfectly comfortable to be there.
Totally comfortable, yeah.
Literally washed the corpse, and there was nobody. I was watching them very intently, and nobody.
And by hand, they didn't have a piece of cloth or anything. They were just pouring the water on the skin and washing it just like with their own hands.
Nobody seemed repulsed or freaked out. It was just this is how it is, and this is how it is. We're a little bit in denial in contemporary culture, but it was encouraging to see this different perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
And having said that, there's balance in life and there's balance in an episode. We also got invited to serendipitously to some rather enlivening things, the sights and the sounds, and then in Ubud is known as sort of a neo-spiritualist
hub,
like Sedona, and we somehow, one way or another, met a lady who does Sensual Awakening. And she did a ritual which is very different than the death ritual, which was all about waking up the senses and intimacy and
living in the moment.
Living in the moment. And I'll tell you, I was in a super heightened state in the death ceremony, and then in this thing, I was in a super heightened state as well. But different triggers were being flipped for sure.
Yeah, different spectrums.
Different spectrums.
Yeah, different ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, and I think you'll be interested to see the two of them. They're both the extremes. I think something about contemporary culture is about living more in the middle, right? Not rocking the boat. You don't want to be seen as a weirdo or too much on the edges, but we're definitely missing something by not living the full spectrum of experience. And sooner or later, all these experiences will reach us, and quite often we live through them alone, or we hide these emotions and these feelings inside of us because we feel like they're shameful. But it kind of came to us to embrace these things on the show, and I hope, in a small way, it would make you guys, if you're not in this place, more comfortable with embracing them as well.
Yeah. We've veered off into a tangent. When people think Bali, they think villa life, pools, and beach clubs, and
there's plenty of that.
There's plenty of that, but we just followed the call of the road less traveled, and this is where it took us.
Right.
But I think we captured, like I said, the different ends of the spectrum pretty well.
For sure, the death and the life, the pristine and the dirty.
Yeah.
And the popular and the unknown. Everything in life has two sides of the coin, and you've got to come to a point in your life where you're comfortable at like flipping the coin over and getting to know all sides of it.
Cool. Let's get to the questions.
Your questions.
All right. Stephanie asks, one experience that changed you emotionally and totally changed your outlook. I feel like it's applicable to what the story you just mentioned with our friend that passed, and us experiencing these death ceremonies, and totally changed my perspective. It's really difficult to describe, but it's something that you and I spoke about, which was we filmed a lot of shamanistic rituals on the road less traveled, and you always think, it's just some guy that is considered an expert in this, and people are very susceptible to being influenced by people that practice shamanism. So I always kind of pass it off as malarkey, and there is no ghost sort of mentality. But in this episode, with what you mentioned about your feeling with our friend, passing, and us having to deal with Dukuns, shamans again, the idea came to me that perhaps it's not about real life ghosts and dark apparitions and things like that. Perhaps what these people are able to do is tap into a sort of channel, a wavelength, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Long story short, what I felt and learned was perhaps there is this wavelength of energy that shamans, faith healers can tap into that we're not privy to.
For sure.
Even when you did that ceremony with the Dukun, where you were trying to see sense this spiritual force that he spoke of, when I was off to the sides in the fringes, there was that one moment at the 10-minute mark where I felt like, whoa, kind of out of place. And that was almost the same time that our fixer walked away, because I think he sensed something too.
I felt something around the 10-minute mark as well.
Yeah.
Just this opening of awareness, and it was like everything became one field. It's so hard. It's so
extremely hard to describe. Yeah.
It's hard to describe. It's kind of like your whole life. When people describe fruits to you, all you see are apples, oranges, and bananas, right? And then those things become synonymous with fruit. In the same way that when we think of supernatural, we think of ghosts, demons, or angels.
Right, exactly.
And so you go see a shaman, or you hear somebody's story, or you're trying to look for it. You see a ghost show on TV. That's what you're looking for. And go back to the fruit example. Let's say you go out with a forester here in Bali, and they're like, look at that fruit, but they're pointing at a durian, but all you've seen are apples, oranges, and bananas, so you don't even see the durian. And I think there's something there in in this realm of awareness. We'd be foolish to say that what we see through our little cone of vision is all there is to see.
Exactly.
We know that's not true. We know that bees see other spectrums of light, other creatures view reality different than we do.
Yeah, bats with sonar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is something else out there, but you'd be a charlatan or a liar to say that you exactly know what it is. But we are limited by our stories that it's going to look like a ghost, a demon, or an angel. And once you let go of that story, which I briefly did sitting there with this witch doctor, I let go of that idea of seeing something that looks human-like. And then something opened up to me, which words can't quite capture.
Yeah, so that was personally my experience with our friend passing, you sensing it, the whole theme of death coming together, all with the Trunyan village in Bali and the death ceremony, and then feeling what I felt similar to you with that ceremony, with that shaman.
Right.
It totally changed my outlook on mystical energy forces. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts,
right?
But I do believe that there is a certain field that perhaps people can tap into that 99.9% of the population cannot.
Because we're too distracted.
Yeah.
And we don't give it validity anymore. That the shaman used to be a integral part of tribes back for the majority of humankind as we were traveling in tribes. But I don't know if it had around agriculture or maybe the Industrial Revolution, these shamans kind of got pushed out and into the realm of mysticism, and it was like you're a drug user, you're too far out there, man, or whatever, like you're just spooky. But it was their job in tribal society to explore different realms of awareness and report back to the tribe, and you could take it or leave it, see what you think about it.
I think the age of industrialization basically killed that whole spiritual side of shamanism.
It did, yeah. And, there was a lot of gobbledygook in there.
For sure, yeah.
But the baby kind of got thrown out with the bathwater. There is something. It's just when charlatans come around and say, like, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. It's the lizard king living in the core of the earth and blah, 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 blah. Right? No, if you say with certainty that you know what it is, you don't know what it is. But there's more than we just perceive. I guess that's the bottom line. What was the question again?
The specific question was one experience that changed you emotionally and totally changed your outlook.
All right.
So I just answered that.
Who
Stephanie.
Stephanie? All right, Stephanie. We'll give you a bang for your buck on this question. I've got a different answer, although I completely agree with what you're saying. I was in Rishikesh, which is like the spiritual yoga hub of India, and I stayed a couple nights at the Osho ashram, and a Sufi guest presenter was there, and he put us through some Sufi rituals. And one of the rituals was sitting across from another person and staring them in the eyes, and there may have been some chanting involved, I don't recall. But I got seated across from a 60-year-old Indian woman, and I never stare in the eyes of a 60-year-old Indian woman, but here I was for 2 minutes. We stared each other in the eyes, and I really thought, this woman, in a sense, is me. If I was born as a woman in India, I would be her. And if she was born as a man in Peoria, Illinois, to my parents, she would be me. Right? It's just an accident of birth. I can claim no responsibility for my brain, for my circumstances. I didn't do any of that. It's just, I don't know, fate, destiny. And since that experience, a few times I've looked people in the eye and I've had a very similar feeling. Most recently, before we started filming, I was in Myanmar, in Yangon, and stopped in traffic, and a beggar kid came up to the window. And I have a policy with beggars. It's a hard one to maintain, but the truth is a lot of these kids are part of a racket, and their money is going to go to some kind of a mob ring, and if they're pulling in more money, more kids are going to get taken out of the village. It's a sad situation. You want to help, but giving that kid money does not help. But it's still a tough one. When the kid's at your window, it's tough. So this kid is at my window, he's asking for money. Your natural inclination, if you're not going to give them money, is to look away. But I thought, no, why look away? This kid is a human being. So I just looked the kid in the eyes, and I was like, sorry, man. No, I can't do it, but I'm sorry. And we just gazed at each other, and he looked away, and he looked back at me. He looked away, he looked back at me. But I probably maintained over a minute of eye contact with this kid during this time, and just like with that Indian woman, I was like, I could see that common humanity, like in a sense we were the same spirit. And I thought about that kid a lot afterwards, like I felt him. So that there's something very powerful that happens when you look somebody else in the eye and you stop thinking about things, stop telling yourself a story about them, just look at them and just take them in. Mm-hmm. And that has been my powerful travel experience.
Deep.
We're going deep on this one. You guys ready for a deep one?
All right. So Edward and Rick both sort of asked the same question. I'll compartmentalize it. Edward asks, what would you consider the most dangerous place you've been? I know that one.
I know what you're going to say. Do you want to start?
No, go ahead.
But his answer is a good one. It ended up being, I didn't know at the time it was going to be so dangerous, but that's one of the closest times we've gotten, almost been killed.
Lynched.
The only time I've almost been lynched, and it was close. And another dangerous spot we filmed was Transnistria, which is a breakaway.
Whoa, let's just say what spot that was. Srinagar.
The first one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Srinagar.
India.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Srinagar, go ahead and tell that story.
Ooh. Yeah, how do I even start? We were tracking the supposed story of Jesus Christ's lost year in India. Mm-hmm. A journey which took him from Orissa up to Leh Ladakh, and supposedly he died in Srinagar. Mm-hmm. And the burial ground was a Christian site initially, correct? And then a mosque got built on top of that?
Yeah, I think it was like a non-denominational, nondescript, just like this guru lays here.
Right.
And then how many years later would that have been? 500, 600, 700 years later, the Muslims rolled in and they turned it into a mosque, and they buried one or two of their prophets on top of this guy.
On top of Jesus's supposed final resting place.
Right.
Yeah.
The guy below, who could be Jesus, is facing Jerusalem, and the Muslim prophets on top of him are facing Mecca. And it's a fascinating story. I don't want to give all the details away here because it's a long story, but it's one of the most gripping, fascinating stories, probably the most fascinating story I've ever heard. And we stumbled upon it. We go to the neighborhood. The neighborhood is separatist, meaning they don't want to be part of India, they want to be part of Pakistan, and they're causing a lot of trouble in the vain idea that India is going to be like, all right, go away, become part of Pakistan. And also they're pretty zealous about their religion, and you got to know that even though they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah, like the Quran has a very specific story about Jesus, and saying that he is dead in the ground does not match up with that story. So technically it's blasphemous in Islam as well.
So you can imagine what happens when a tuk-tuk filled with journalists roll up to this neighborhood, to this very site. Our tuk-tuk literally, 15 feet away from this site. We roll out, we have these big cameras, he's there, and we immediately get swarmed by locals. Young guys, extremely, extremely angry that we were there documenting this story.
Right.
And the mob just started getting bigger and bigger.
The mob started growing.
And in India, like a mob goes just like that.
Yeah.
And it could be anything. You bust out a camera, whatever.
You hit a cow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's scary when you feel you can really feel the shift in energy when a group of independent thinking people suddenly drop into the mob mentality. It's like they become one angry hive of bees.
And we were at the epicenter of that.
And we
caused that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unknowingly.
Yeah, and we barely made it out with our lives. Our driver interceded and basically pleaded for our lives. He told us to get in the taxi. As he's still pleading, he's like, get in a taxi! And he's like, he's calming them down, he's holding them at bay. We get in, we drive off, they're pounding on the car, and we didn't say a word for several blocks. Just our hands were shaking.
Yeah.
And then
for me, that was definitely the most dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm not even counting the paragliding stories.
That whole episode was the most dangerous for sure. Like if the highest odds of us dying were definitely on that episode.
Season 1, episode 3-4.
3, 4, yeah. And there was a later episode. It doesn't compare really. So in light of that story, my other story is weak sauce. But we filmed in an area called Transnistria, which is a breakaway republic that's broke off of Romania. There was a small war fought over it. Russia interceded to help Transnistria win the war. Now it's a country that's not recognized by anybody, and the rumor is that there's a lot of drug and arms running going through it. So people want to keep it off the books. But because it's not recognized, there's no embassies, and they're very kind of a totalitarianism, secret police kind of state. And we snuck in there with cameras and filmed on the low, looking over our shoulder all the time. High risk, because if you get arrested, there's no ambassador to intercede for you.
Yeah.
And we made it through. We're in the bus station about to leave. The bus is going to be an hour. Our fixer says, "You guys stay here. I'm going to go check the train." While he's gone, somebody comes up to me and says something in Russian, and I'm like, and then he's like, "Come with me," and he leads us to a window, and the guy's like, "Passport," and we give over our passports, and the guy's, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Oh, we're just tourists. I'm a paragliding instructor." He's whatever, made up some job titles, but we're holding a bag that's full of cameras and sound equipment, and journalists, it's a no-no. So if they would have opened up the bag, we might be still in prison. And thankfully they didn't open up the bag. As the guy's going over the passport, I'm giving him these answers. I see a calendar behind him with some castle that we didn't visit, but I read about it. And I look over his shoulder, I'm like, "Oh, that is such and such castle, isn't it?" And the guy looks up and he beams with pride, like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Yeah, I heard it's one of the most magnificent castles." And I get him on a roll of talking about the castle and how nice Transnistria is. And thankfully, the tactic works, and it kind of takes his mind off of who are these guys. And instead, we start building some rapport. He likes us. He hands us back our passports, and we slip out of there. But it was a close call. I mean, it was one bag zip away from potential prison.
For sure.
And that's the road less traveled. We've taken some big gambles on the show, and so far they've paid off.
Yeah, then there was a similar question from Rick, which was, have you ever left a location from fear of your safety? I feel we covered that with the Srinagar incident.
For sure. We were getting out of there after that.
Yeah.
No doubt.
But we did go back the next day.
Yeah, go back the next day.
You'll have to watch the episode why. All right. Arijit writes, how did this journey begin, and what keeps you guys going?
Journey of like the show?
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, you were the originator. You tell the story.
I guess I had wrapped a previous project which was called Way of Life, and that was about exotic professions, which, as the title suggests, weren't really professions, they were really way of life. A rice farmer in the Banaue province of Philippines, that's all he does for his entire life. That's all his family's done for generations. So it's not a job, it's what they live. So that was the premise of that show, and I wanted to start a new project in a similar vein where we would cover stories like that, but I didn't want that to be the singular story. I wanted other elements that really define a location, because you can't explain the Philippines with the story of a rice farmer, right? So I wanted to expand the scope, but not fall into the trap of the typical travelogue kind of show. So it was something that was kind of bouncing around my mind for a while, the idea of Road Less Traveled, but it's not someone that you can just cast and set him free and hopefully get a show together. You have to find the right person that really embodies the spirit of Road Less Traveled. So, I don't know, through the ether, somehow we came into connection, and
yeah, we met once at the Jelly Belly Bean Factory
in Northern California. Yeah. His suggestion.
Yeah, and we just had one meeting, and next thing you know, we're filming season 1 in India. So
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later, there was that immediate rapport, and the feeling was right, because we got there to India, and it just took a life of its own, and it was just the two of us, and our energy really complemented each other. We knew, when a situation came up, who should take charge of this one, who should do what. It was like a seamless team. And for this kind of a show, it really has to be.
Yeah, it has to be very, I keep saying the word organic, but really that's probably the word for Road Less Traveled, because it's totally unscripted, whatever comes our way. And season 1 was the embodiment of that. I would say 2 months, a little over 2 months. We didn't have a single day off. We bounced around all over India with no plan.
Yeah.
Occasionally hitting up spots that was closed for the season, like Goa, and just finding where the stories took us. And that was our first season, and it became a smash hit.
Yeah,
And
it set the tone.
It set the tone, yeah. And that's how the journey began.
That's how the journey began. And what keeps us going? I think it's just in our genes, to be honest. I feel like it's my nature to be a storyteller. I don't take credit for a lot of these stories. Very little of what you see on camera is my original idea. I just am a filter for them, right? So I like
conduit,
to hunt
yeah.
A conduit, yeah. I like to seek them out and then try to communicate them, because travel was a big influence on my life. I came out of the Midwest originally as a pretty square guy, and it was the road, it was traveling that exposed me to new ideas and broke down those old constructs and opened me up to new possibilities, and ultimately led to what I hope is a kinder, more open-minded, more generous, more understanding, more patient man. And I really want to convey a little bit of that to the audience by being as honest and authentic about the stories as possible. And I feel like you have a similar mission.
Yeah, absolutely. My viewpoint is obviously behind the camera, so you're the storyteller, I'm the story capturer, so to speak. And besides keeping it genuine, what keeps me going? I think it's the ability, the privilege that we have to go to far-flung places on our planet like Antarctica or the jungles of Burma, Thailand, and experience it for ourselves, capture it. The whole creative process of filming is something that I'm passionate about. And not just that, but putting it together. When you're in post-production, it's a different ball game, and you have so much leeway. You could sensationalize something, or you could keep it real.
Right.
So having that choice, and then finally, when you're done with the final cut, and you're sitting and watching it on the monitor, thinking, yeah, I think this is good, and then knowing that it's going to go out to millions of people. We've been all over the world, so it's in the millions.
Right.
It's quite a feeling to be able to share exactly what I felt at that moment with you alongside me, and beam that story out to millions worldwide. That's what definitely keeps me going.
It's a lot of responsibility, and especially this episode, speaking on death, knowing that our friend was dying, I felt that heavy responsibility of I want to do him justice. I want to do this subject justice. If this is the only time I ever speak about it, can I say the right words? We've got 45 minutes to say everything. So, I felt the heaviness of it, but also the honor of it. And you just have to trust that the story came to you, just like in your own life, when things happen to you, when experiences happen to you. You have to trust that it came to you in the right time, and that because it came to you and you're there, you are ready for it. You're meant for that moment. So I try to hold that frame. There's always that part of you that's like, you're not ready. You're not going to do this good enough. But just what can you do but to be authentic and to believe that you are meant to be in this moment that came to you. And to go back to the question, what keeps us going? It's not like the travel, not like we're seasoned travelers and so we're done like with our evolution. We're learning every episode. So
Constantly.
It's quite an honor, and it's an honor, and it's a what's the word? It's a refining process. I feel like every one of these trips really helps me become a better human being by looking at different sides of life, meeting different people, hearing different perspectives.
And also creatively, we keep getting better.
That's true.
You know, incorporating new things. Technology keeps getting better, so we incorporate those aspects. You know, drones being an example
For sure.
of that
Yeah.
creative aspect. And I think one final point is it's also a rip-roaring good time. That's
Yeah.
what keeps us going.
Yeah,
right?
we have a lot of laughs on the road.
A lot of laughs, and I think we say this to everybody that we meet. I mean, the stories that we accumulate in 1 year, forget the 5 seasons, in just 1 year, we probably end up doing more than people do in an entire lifetime.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a great time.
It's a great time. Yeah, and we owe it to you, the fans, for watching, and thank you so much for your support, and that you give us your time to hear the stories, and that you trust us to give you something authentic and worthy of your time.
Yeah.
And we think about you. I'm sure in the edit room, Sasha thinks about giving you the best possible container for the story, and I think about giving you the most honest conveyor of my feelings about a subject and what the subject is. And I don't take any of you for granted. I know I've made my big mistakes on the show, and we call them out when we find them. I've definitely made some gaffes, but I really try to, even if it's the most remote temple in India, I triple check the name. You know, maybe one of you knows that I'm wrong, but I think about that one person, right? I don't want to lose your respect. It's important to me that all of you know that I'm giving you something honest, and that I'm honest about my feelings about things, and that we're not cruising, that we're not phoning it in, that we're really digging in and trying our best. And we're fallible, we make mistakes. I always think I can do it better, but I think every time we're giving our best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that about wraps it up. Any remaining questions we'll address in our next podcast, which should be coming to you from either the Philippines or back here in Indonesia.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching The Road That's Traveled.
Yeah, share it with your friends, and we'll be back soon.
Right on. Big hugs from Indonesia. See you guys.